Want to bring in Principal Global Investor CEO Jim McCaughan with us right now. And Jim, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be with you,
Your
Maria.
reaction to the news out of the UK?
Well, it was a surprise compared with the polls, but then we've got used to electorates surprising us, haven't we, on both sides of the Atlantic.
It's true.
It's interesting that Mrs. May is going to see the Queen this quickly, which suggests, as your commentator said, that there's a deal with the Ulster Unionists. If that's the case, she will be able to form a government, but it will be a slightly precarious one, because she'll be beholden not only to the Unionists, but also to the different shades of opinion within the Conservative Party. So it's going to be quite difficult for her to present any strong and unified line in the Brexit discussions, and that's when it gets really interesting. If she fails to form a government, the protocol is that Jeremy Corbyn would be asked to form one. With the numbers in Parliament, that looks unlikely. So there is a fair chance of another election, I'm afraid.
Wow.
6 to 9 months could be as long as it goes. But having said that, I think what we're in for is a very uncertain Brexit negotiation.
Wow. So the uncertainty obviously has already impacted currencies. The British pound down this morning. What about stocks? How do you invest around this?
Well, of course, the weakness in the currency is good for stocks, because so many global companies are listed in London and British business has so much dependent on exports. The weakness of the currency since the Brexit vote last June, almost a year ago, the weakness of the currency is what's really saved the UK economy and stock market. It probably needs a bit more weakness of the currency, just given the political developments. So how do you play it? Well, I think it's rather like any of the European markets. I'm not particularly optimistic about any of the European markets. I think the economic developments and the uncertainty around Brexit will cause some pain. I regard them as a bit of a sell on strength. In any case, before this election. This doesn't change my view on them.
Just really quickly, looking at some of the individual sectors, you have seen initially weakness in some of the bank stocks. A worry for bank shareholders is that that you could have the Labour Party would launch a move to break up the banks, but you have not seen Labour concerns, if you will, in the utility stocks.
No.
Because again, Corbyn policy platform would be potentially nationalism for the utilities there. So it's been kind of a sector-by-sector movement.
It's very remote that he'd get nationalisation through with the number of seats he has in Parliament. That's a long way ahead, and that would require him to have a real majority, which he's very far from. The arithmetic would make it very difficult for Corbyn to form a government.
Do we see a softer Brexit either way here, regardless of who forms a minority government? And are UK businesses actually okay with that? I mean, do they like the fact that that probably means some stronger trade and economic ties with the EU?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And that's one of the perhaps positives in this, because it looked... Remember, Theresa May is not a particularly economics or growth-oriented leader. Her background was as Home Secretary, and she's not really got a track record as a pro-growth economics leader. We were headed, if she got a big majority, towards a hard Brexit. I mean, basically, exit from the EU with no trade deal, and then they have to scramble to put together trade deals. Business was apprehensive about that. I think this makes that a bit less likely.
So that's a positive.
There will be more factions in there trying to stay within EU trade arrangements.
Yeah, the problem I see with this, though, and the reaction in the pound has to do with tax and trade policies. Now, one of the things that this current government wanted to do was to take taxes to 17%. That's certainly up in the air now.
Yeah.
Also, trade was a big deal that was happening that was part of the Brexit situation, and why people were saying invoke Article 50 because they had to get some certain products from within the EU, which was more expensive. Now, when I'm looking at this, all that uncertainty is creating even more uncertainty when it comes to Scotland. The S&P even lost more seats, which was interesting.
Yes.
So I just don't see this being a good thing for the British economy, because it's breeding even more uncertainty.
Yeah, I think that's right. On balance, there is more uncertainty. It does mean, with the Scottish nationalists losing seats, that another Scottish referendum may be a bit less likely than it looked this time yesterday. So there's some of those mitigating factors. But Theresa May was never standing on tax reform. She was standing on some slightly pro-business reductions in tax rates. The tax reform agenda is the really important one in the United States, but it hasn't really been present in the UK. And I think as we look at Comey's testimony, the question to me isn't around the personalities, which is all very fascinating, but the real question to me is, does it make tax reform and deregulation more or less likely?
What's the answer?
I think the answer is it makes it a bit less likely. A bit less likely. There are two things that are stopping the administration move forward with, or potentially stopping the administration moving forward with the pro-business parts of their agenda: the ongoing investigations and the locking up of the Senate of the American Health Care Act. Those two things make the tax reform and deregulation less powerful.
Wow.
And that's an issue. If there were any way that you could see that agenda coming above water and emerging, that would be very good for business and the market.
Of course, that's what we're all waiting on. Jim, great to have your insights this morning. Thanks so much. Jim McCaughan joining us there.